multi-presenter sessions in terms of their keeping time and having proper time for discussion. So now we have a whole series of multi-person discussions, including a 4 or 5-person session after this one. So, Kate and Nadja, do you introduce yourself and your talk?
Okay. So, basically, Nadja and I do this in 2 parts. I'm going to go first and give you sort of the kind of sociological stroke, ethical issues, kind of work on socio-ethical issues. And Nadja's going to follow up with the kind of law side. So basically, I'm visiting from the Spanish Research Council from the Institute of Philosophy. And I work neither on empirical ethics nor sociological bioethics, but I'm kind of indebted to both of those because empirical ethics kind of comes along and tries to apply a set of normative principles to a kind of empirical situation. And there's a kind of uneasy relationship that, there's quite a lot of work in empirical ethics on that, about how that should be done, how far data kind of should be taken into account and that sort of thing. And on the sociology of bioethics, again, it's been very useful literature, but I find it difficult that they kind of stop before they make sort of moral judgments, or they're kind of squeamish about that, obviously coming from sociology. So that's fine. My kind of substantive areas of interest are data sharing and collaboration. I've mostly done this with research data. But as you'll see when I'm talking, some of my experience is also working with the sharing of identifiable data, and that's why that's kind of going to appear in my sort of typography. Nadja, do you want to introduce yourself, or shall I introduce you?
Hello. So I'm Nadja. I'm based at the Mason Institute at the School of Law. It's an interdisciplinary institute with a team of many lawyers, but also sociologists and psychologists and students and informatics and medical science colleagues. My background is in the governance of biobanking. I'm a socio-legal scholar, so I'm interested both in the concepts and norms and technical aspects of the law, but also how the law can be socially informed. And I'm interested in the dynamics of relationships. I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk. And because I'm dealing a lot with governance of data and biobanking, I'm currently working on data governance and data collection projects. And this includes collaborations with computer sciences colleagues on using ISSTI technologies in controlling data where the law fails with these technologies sometimes.
Just a final word, Nadja and I actually met at the Genomics Forum 8 years ago, and we're still using our photographs because they were professionally done. Okay, so I'm going to, as I say, talk about topography of data sharing. I'll say what I mean by that in a second. I'm visiting, as I said, from the Spanish Research Council, and I'd just like to say thanks very much to Robin and Steve here as well for kind of facilitating my stay here. And thanks to Robin for allowing Nadja and I to stay. Okay, so this is actually a definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, but I think it's quite sort of strange at first. So what I kind of mean is the features kind of taken together. So you're looking at them not kind of separately, but looking at them kind of collectively. So I just thought, because it reads a bit strangely, but it is from the Oxford English Dictionary. And basically, a topography, I thought of topography more than a typology because I've tried to do typologies before. And I tried to do typology of biobanks, for example, and I found that it was just very difficult to kind of get a type that you could then sort of go through and say, well, these are the types of things that there are. So this is a kind of pop-up in a way that I can describe the messiness a bit more easily. Also, I should say, it's completely partial because it's my kind of little journey through my own work, which is looked at data sharing in different ways. And I think, like any sort of map, I really describe what I've seen. So it's partial. Yes. Okay, so just because we now live in the era of big data, I'm going to say something about big data. So, what is big data? What kind of constitutes big data? And I think it's a very problematic thing to say that data is anything, really. I wouldn't say data has any essential quality at all. And also, when you think about something like big data, you then think, well, what about small data? And we're on a journey from small data to big data because we're around the era of big data, so don't we have any small data now? Does anybody notice medium-sized data actually kind of really concerning? So I find it very And it doesn't tell me anything that I want to know, really, about what's happening with data. And then people say, well, big data is about the 3 V's, so it's about variety. And we heard from Stuart and also Steve Ely yesterday, they were talking about different ways of kind of knowing about things, so like crowdsourcing, for example. And there's data coming from just hundreds of different sources now. And I was listening to a talk last week where somebody was in the Mason Institute, where somebody was talking about you can get data from your car, which kind of records like what's going on in your car, and that's kind of data, and it goes up somewhere, it's processed, and you think, wow, it's mind-blowing, where all the kind of the variety of data. So, I admit that there's potential for lots of variety. The velocity of processing, the kind of algorithm stuff, the data mining that can tell you things that, when you get your, when somebody steals your credit card and things like that, and then you tell quite soon that it's not you because they can process that data almost in real time. So, it's very fast, and also they can come up with kind of facts about the data that then becomes more data, and that goes into that feeds back into the variety in a sort of loop. And so this all kind of points in one direction, which is that we've just got more data. So this person at the Mason Institute, who was a statistician, she said that she heard that big data was just data. And I think I agree with that. And the thing about data is, I don't ever see it as just being one thing. I think it always is what it is because it's in relationships with other things. It's in assemblages, which I'm going to use quite a lot, or it's in configurations with a set of users who want it for a particular reason. And this changes all the time. And so, hence my next slide really is trying to kind of flesh out or trying to give you an idea of that. And as I say, it's partial. So you're going to see connections here that I probably haven't put in, but I kind of put them as I thought of them. So starting off with the very problematic notion for me of identifiable data and research data. And it's very problematic because I think that these two things are not absolute. But this dichotomy is completely accepted. Well, I think that things are kind of changing slightly. There was a report by the Data Commissioner last year where it was kind of obvious in policy circles that this kind of dichotomy between identifiable and research data is perhaps not absolute. But it's been for a very long time, very important in law and in kind of the management of research data, what subjects are told when they kind of get involved in giving data. And also about the expectations you have, what happens to you because somebody has identifiable data about you, as opposed to research data about you. So then I thought about some of the kind of reasons that people have been data subjects that I've seen. So in one of the early projects I worked in, it's actually what got me to Edinburgh. I worked on a project with a man called Charles Brown, and he was looking at, he's in the politics department, he's looking at why people kind of share data. And the kind of key concept really was about risky people, and risky people can be risky because they are vulnerable. Because it followed on from the Victoria Columbia case, and obviously more recently we've had Baby P. And these kind of ideas that, by data sharing you can avoid these cases of somebody who's at risk. By data sharing you could have saved that person, basically. And then on the other hand, you've got risky people who pose a risk. So we started this project just after the Sarah murders. And again, you've got this idea that you can stop horrible things happening by sharing data. So this then is just to kind of think about the users, and obviously in local authority, because this is going to get even messier soon. So in local authority, I'm also thinking about housing and as well as social work, and they kind of share. So up here, everybody's thinking there. Up here, you can see a sort of configuration or assemblage, perhaps of a type of person or people, and the kind of people who are interested in knowing about them and why. Okay, and then over here you've got something quite different. And so I'm just going to add in now the kind of possible data sources. So as I say, partial, very partial, but here you've got different types of configurations potentially. So you've got people who kind of come from biobanks, and that's research data. But you can also think of, how the configurations here are problematic because people are also interested in sick people as research subjects in biobanks. But for example, some of the records for UK biobank are going to come from identifiable sources in the NHS. So you've got data that's making the transition that's being collected for a particular set of reasons, going over here to be used for different set of things. Okay, so just to think a bit about how people get hold of data and the kind of two, this is a rough dichotomy that I've got. I mean, basically you can collaborate. You can collaborate like informally with within these sorts of circles up here, like police and social work, and then we'll talk about a particular person that's a bit worrying or they're worried about. And scientists can have sort of informed collaborations, so clinicians can share data with people, clinicians who work on similar kind of diseases in other parts of the world and are also interested in research. And then you've got this repository thing, which is more and more is the thing that data is going to be accessed by a repository. So this changes very much the relationships. Because instead of one kind of potentially a clinician scientist controlling where the data goes and having kind of these discussions and negotiations with people, you've got repositories, so a different set of protocols apply, and who gets to decide who gets the data for what purposes, that set of actors shifts as well. So then you've got a set of different types of access. As I said, you've got informal access, which kind of, collaborations can be either informal or formal. And you've got managed access, which I think Generation Scotland is, and then you've got this open access, which has been really problematic because for some of the reasons I'm going to talk about in the next slide, basically. But there's been this whole discourse about let's get things out there, let's and it very much follows on from the Human Genome Project, which is the poster child for open access, where they beat Craig Venter to map the genome because they were so open with the data we show. So that's kind of often applied to other fields now, and other types of data, and that's kind of been problematic. And then just to add a few more things in, so then you've got what people think the data is for and what you should and shouldn't do with the data. So as there's more and more data around, people kind of and there's different tools like data mining tools to analyse it. You get this kind of whole set of people who are trained to do data-driven research, and that is would have been that would have been a complete anathema a few years ago for people who kind of worked in the kind of census and survey area to do kind of data-driven research was complete no-no, and now it's becoming more and more the norm. And all of these kind of potential, all of these different data sources are all kind of potentially usable in data-driven research. For example, even though they were maybe not intended for that, or they perhaps even weren't intended for research. So this is just an idea to give you an idea of how messy, kind of the context is. The idea of context kind of is difficult because, it's a kind of very rhizomatic schema where things can be connected to lots of other things and are and will be. And one of the things I think for Nadja is going to be a problem in time trying to govern that is that you wouldn't really want to say any of these connections absolutely shouldn't happen or absolutely should happen. So as I see the world and these set of connections as opposed to kind of just the context, it's very difficult for me to sort of say, well, God, you never have the police kind of access data from Facebook to their back or ancestry databases or anything like that. Everything that's captured in commercial companies because sometimes you might want that because of terrorism and whatever. And obviously transaction data in the keys, people who can do fraudulent transactions and things like that. So, you would never kind of want to say never. So I think that's quite difficult really. So I'm not really sure I'm helping that too much with that. So just to maybe point out where I kind of come in think about ethics and things like that. So I'm interested in socio-ethical relationships, really. And kind of, there's a philosopher called Helen Nissenbaum who talks a lot about context, and she talks about a concept called contextual integrity. And this is a very persuasive concept if you're thinking about socio-ethical relationships, because you kind of think, yeah, in a given set of circumstances, so any one of the kind of possible relationships I've just talked about there, you kind of go in there, you've got a set of expectations. So if you give your data to the Office for National Statistics for a census, you kind of think, okay, and I've done research on that, which is why it appeared. People kind of have said, well, I'm given it's a government organisation, and censuses are for counting how many people are in the country, and seeing how kind of different groups, the size of different groups have changed. But actually, that sort of data is used by companies like Experian to profile, and that's used for all sorts of kind of profiling processes which are not necessarily research. So that's a problem with context. It's kind of things can escape from the context, and then how useful is the context in the first place? I mean, as I say, it's a very persuasive concept, so I'm not really sure where I stand on that. But I mean, certainly in terms of what happens, I find an assemblage a much better concept. And assemblage obviously comes from Deleuze and Guattari's idea from the French word for arrangements, basically. And I think arrangements are a really good way of thinking about it, because arrangements are kind of slightly contingent, and they're kind of what suit the people in situ at the time. And it's also got that sort of rather kind of transient feel about it, which a context doesn't have. The context feels quite solid and has boundaries and things like that, whereas an assemblage doesn't. Things are always escaping, and that is the nature of assemblage. And I think that's how I very much see the data sharing world. So, to end on a negative note, what we've got at the moment is kind of, the way we manage data, and I'm talking here very much about research data now, is via these kind of two pillars, these very long-standing pillars of research data, which are consent and confidentiality. So you consent based on this idea of a liberal idea of autonomy of a rational subject who gets to know what will happen as a result of doing something, and gets to say yes or no, right? So that's the idea of consent. And in this kind of new, as uses of data evolve and possible linkages, useful linkages of data evolve, people kind of don't want to be, certainly scientists don't want to be bounded by this consent issue. So they don't want to have to go back to the original consent and say, the consent form says no. So basically, on the one hand, people say, it's too narrow in consent, and it's not useful anymore, we didn't know then what we know now, and who knows what happens in the future. On the other side, you've got this broad consent idea, which is very much a sort of certificate of divorce, really, between the person given the data and the data itself. So it kind of goes off on its own, and you've got no more control over it. And so consent is kind of like, I don't know what it's really doing anymore. It's kind of still used. It's still very important. People really talk about consent, but scientists themselves kind of always say, they have these two kind of worries about it. It's too broad. We can't tell every gene that we're going to do in the future with our kind of our data that we've got. We don't know that we might not want to link it to socioeconomic data. We can't tell them that. So we're going to ask them for just a very, very broad consent. And also kind of no financial kind of benefit to them. And all that's kind of in the consent form now. It's just huge, and it's like, it's basically saying say goodbye to the data. And on the confidentiality side, again, there's this kind of promise that you're going to look after the data. And this is very much been achieved because in research data, you usually are releasing it again. So it's not like it's not like a kind of doctor or a lawyer who would take the data and keep it in their office. Research data is usually there to be reused, and not in all cases, but certainly in a kind of big-ish kind of statistical and genomic sort of data sets and things like that. So this confidentiality kind of applies when data is anonymized, so you can't really identify people. And Again, there are problems with that because confidentiality, or what is anonymous, is again bounded by the kind of assemblage that the data is in. So even something that seems as fundamental as whether something's identifiable or not, there's been lots of work, and there was a paper in 2008 by Homer et al. in Nature where it was found that linking two sets of data together, which there's lots of data around at the moment. That's not a completely mad thought. He linked two different data sets together and was able to re-identify somebody from kind of DNA that had been mixed together at a single crime. So the Wellcome Trust kind of panicked and took all the kind of data down from the web because they had it all open access. So you've got this kind of fudge now where confidentiality, you kind of know it doesn't really apply to some data, but it's kind of what still applies. So that's my sort of provocation to Nadja. And I'll finish there.
Thank you. So, yes, very helpful. It's kind of, we got together to talk about this and trying to develop a new way of common way of viewing things in a different way. Let me find where my slides are. So, thanks for setting the scene for me, because my role is to So my role is to think about how to intervene in the complex messy map that Ken and I have been talking about. So I have a dual role here, because I realized that we're discussing about the contribution of the lawyer. I was talking about the contribution of the lawyer in multiple ways, and we can crystallize them into two: a dual role of the case of the lawyer and the case of the lawmaker. So the person who knows what is done now, what can be done now, and the lawmaker in terms of how things will change. So it's both a reactive and a reflective role that I have here today. So I want to think of talking a little bit about how the law works, where it focuses, what things it doesn't capture, and reflect on the types of relationships that exist during the law as well. So I'm interested in talking about. So we found it helpful to think in terms of the tree of relationships of kinds. Maybe tree is not the right word, but thinking about data and persons and protecting information and topographies and localities of data, it's useful to think in terms of persons, data relate to persons, or is it about the data themselves? Is it about the associations that arise through use of data about what these data say about persons, and the implications of these possible configurations? And it's also interesting to query here if there's something essential about the data, or rather it's not, or is it about the relationships with others, the expectations and configurations that they frame. So that's something that we're battling with when we think of when we configure our legal frameworks of protecting information and protecting persons affected by information. I may use the word data and information interchangeably, forgive me for that. It's not necessarily the way to do it, but I do think it's very significant if we're practical use of today. So a key message for me at this point is that something that Kate already said, and is about the relationships and the configurations that data denote, relationships with others, especially so in statistics and genomics as areas where we're both working at. So a few examples. So Kate introduced a little bit about the ethics, the formal ethics, and some of these requirements are also crystallized in the law. That's the only legally heavy slide I have, I promise. And it's not that heavy. It's more of an overview of the types of areas that the law looks at when it regulates uses of data. So it's consent. Kate introduced the consent. The things that I want to say about consent, and Kate already said that it's static, it's a form. it's a point of entry, and it's this conversation about consent not being something static, but it's a process. If it's a process and we want to control the use of data over time, how much can we do with consent? What other things can we use? So in the research area, we have exemptions sometimes. You don't always need consent to process data, both in the medical research governance, in the data protection law more broadly, so information governance more broadly. There's a misconception that consent is always needed. Data protection, that's not true. In confidentiality, there's this kind of special relationship that has to exist. If we're thinking about this trio of data information associations, there's special relations that harm that create the boundaries of confidential obligations. In privacy, there's a lot of literature from philosophy, from human rights. It's an axis of talking about the protection of some of the psychological space, decisional space, informational space, what that is mean, and how that exists in relationships with others. So it's the space of relationships themselves as well. So there are a lot of relational elements in how we think of privacy, but in the law, privacy is usually very individually based and defined right. So we have tension there already. In data protection, in the traditional data protection, the way we protect information, the way we decide what to protect and what uses to allow, goes back to a set of general principles about fair use, etc. I'm not going to give you a list of key principles. And it's a very kind of case-by-case basis, a case-by-case understanding and elaboration of what uses are allowed. So it's a lot about context and about associations again. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And there's also other ways of contracts, data transfers, data sharing agreements. And overall, something to bear in mind is that it's always about a balance between some rights and the public interest. And this is always a balancing act to bear in mind. So for that was Kate's map, and there's a reason why I just had it there, because for me, in Kate's map there's issues of scale and kind of possible configurations. To give you an example, no, that's too fast, okay. That are constantly interacting. So if I'm thinking of all these different possible configurations and interactions, and in all situations, something that the law we understand as well, we can understand this situation, but it's all about the context. Yeah? It's the context of possible personal data that defines the parameters of protection. That was also mentioned by Stuart yesterday when he was talking about data defined by context and what becomes unrecorded. So so it is the context, and in the law, that's a more general example, thinking of information governance more broadly. Okay, some aspects are very as well. So you just move it from there. So in law, when we talk about the context, you know, the answer to can I do X will be, well, it depends. Yeah? And the background is that individuals have little control over how the data are used once they have been out of the bag, having shared with a third party. And regulators are ill-equipped to protect individuals against breaches of privacy. So, for example, in protections where we think of identifiable data, this depends on the configuration, the relationship that they exist in the associations. And I'm looking for a different way of describing these data topographies, because I think that the vocabulary languages that we have now are important. Trevor was talking about language of affordances yesterday. So this kind of need of describing how to protect the context, how to develop a way of arguing for the protection of the context in a more substantive sense. So there's, as I said, there's a strong dependency of the relationship and the configurations of the data. So it's not just about the identifiability is connected to that. It's not about the data. It's not the data itself. It's the relationship that this data denote. And it's not one set of relationships. There was a complex map a few slides earlier to show an example of some of these. And we have this problem in fixing the boundaries of this relationship. As Kate was saying, that was very helpful. It wasn't provocative in any way. there's a difficulty of setting absolutes because we have this problem of regulating with a fixed boundary when we cannot have such a fixed boundary. So there was a mention of this, so the kind of tension between interpreting reactively, we do quite a lot, and at what point does the law realize that it must do something new? So from the philosophy and ethics, there's this approach on contextual integrity, which some of us are using, but we haven't really used in a very practical sense because it's still part of this effort of looking for language or vocabularies. So contextual integrity, if you're trying to protect particular contexts, because there's different kinds of data configurations that we would want to have and protect. How will you decide? How will you understand the boundaries as flexible and malleable? We have tools in the law to deal with flexibility, but we don't have vocabularies for unfixing the boundaries yet. So that's where I am in my thinking of these topographies. How to develop ways to reconfigure the languages the terms that we use. And something else I wanted to talk about a little bit. So yeah, I mentioned that I'm involved in projects where we're using not just law, but we're using technology or ICT technologies to deal with some of these hurdles, which arguably are a fix. They don't give us any vocabulary in law, they just give us a different technology that might give us a patch. So I'm going to leave that open there, and I'm going to thank you. Sure. Summing up, after I sum up, so the key message for me is that we're trying to protect, we have a problem protecting something that is no longer fixed, because data are out there, we have protections that cover data before they're out of the bag, but they're out there, so how to develop vocabulary to protect them out there. It's not about the data, it's about context, and essentially it's about the future associations of these, of what data reveal. And something for you to think about, maybe for us to think about, and hopefully we can get some discussion on, is thinking about the map that we saw earlier, portfolio relationships. I'd like to get an idea of people in the room, what types of contexts and relationships they're already interested in and working in. Because we're trying to think of possible case studies to apply our very kind of embryonic topographic thinking about reconfiguring data frameworks. Thanks very much. Thank you. And these are our contact details.